Our first speaker today is Dr. Kylie Jarrett. She's an associate professor in media studies in Maynooth University, where she teaches digital media, gender, political economy, research methods, and media and cultural theory. Her research focuses on the political economy of digital media with an emphasis on digital labor. She's the author of Feminism, Labor and Digital Media, The Digital Housewife, which was published by Routledge in 2016, and co-author with Susanna Passonen and Ben Light of #NSFW, Sex, Humor and Risk in Social Media, which actually I just pulled out from underneath my desk there, just published by MIT in 2019. And she's currently co-PI of an IRC, HRC, UK Ireland collaboration in the Digital Humanities Networking Project, which looks at intersections, feminism, technology, and digital humanities. And Kylie's going to be talking with us today about assetization and the OnlyFans platform, which is a chapter, as far as I understand, of her forthcoming book that she's working on at the moment. And then we also have Dr. Antonia Hernández with us today. She is a theorist, designer, and media artist whose work explores infrastructural relations of intimacy. So she's combining theoretical investigation with arts practice to understand the sort of what she's describing as the fleshy, living, and domestic aspects of media. So Antonia's SSHRC supported doctoral research explored the role of fictional currencies or tokens to enable effective communication and different kinds of exploitation in the context of the platform economy. And that project on Chatterbait included an arts-based exploration of the SexCam platform, Chatterbait, through a series of performative interventions staged in a dollhouse and broadcast through the same platform. So I think we're going to see an example of this in a minute in Antonia's talk. So that research is also the subject of a forthcoming book, The Machine of Social Reproduction. Antonia is also founding member of the Archive and Design Collective Material that works with cultural and community organizations, researchers and artists to develop knowledge mobilization strategies. So I'm going to kick off today by showing you Kylie's presentation, which we have pre-recorded here.
Hi everyone, welcome to my talk today at NCAD. What I'm discussing today emerges out of a forthcoming book I'm writing at the moment called Unimaginatively Digital Labour. It is about digital labour, and the argument is that I'm making today is about all forms of digital labour that I'm talking about in the book, but I'm going to focus, I guess, specifically on influencers and OnlyFans today, but there are broader implications that I just don't have time to go through today, but yeah, bear with me. Hopefully the argument will make sense because I've had to compress it down quite a bit, so we'll see. Anyway, what money can't buy, the assetization of Bella Thorne. So for those who don't know, former Disney star and singer Bella Thorne caused quite an upset in 2020 when she launched an OnlyFans page. And for those who don't know, OnlyFans is a subscriber web service where if you pay a certain amount, you get access to kind of more private messages or images or video clips or what have you from people that you follow. It's been driven primarily by sex workers who use it as an excellent, valuable revenue source. So Bella Thorne did an OnlyFans site and made over US $2 million in less than a week from this site. So among many other controversies associated with this, Bella Thorne's foray into the realm of online sex work also tapped into much longer deep-seated controversy, which is the legitimacy of commodifying inalienable aspects of yourself, including and especially sexuality. There is, as Viviana Zelazer reminds us, ongoing and continual negotiations in any society about what constitutes a legitimate commercialization of intimacy, and also about what constitutes a legitimate commodity and what is illegitimate. So it's here that the critique of OnlyFans draws on, or at least connects with, Marxian critiques of the commodification of self, or the commodification of labor power. So Marxist thinking commodification is the process by which an object with use value becomes dominated by exchange value, by what it can realize in the marketplace becomes more important than what it actually means in context and for the person who's creating that object. And in doing so, the object becomes reified, it becomes thing-like and thus passive and very static. So to commodify yourself, or as in Bella Thorne's case, your embodied sexuality, is to transform one of the most intimate and generally considered inalienable aspects of self, of human existence, into an object suitable for exchange in the marketplace. This object can then effectively be taken from you, sold, and consumed outside of its context, outside of your control. Through that process that your sexuality becomes alienated from you, it becomes something that is distanced from you and acts upon you. And alienation from your core self, the denial of species being, is the great tragedy of Marx's free laborers. But is this really what's happening here? So today I want to reframe the kind of self-exploitation that Bella Thorne is involved in and argue that we shouldn't view this as commodification, but using the work of Michel Fer, I want to refer to it as assetization, and in doing so, reclaim some agency for influencers and OnlyFans workers, but also for a whole bunch of digital laborers, which I talk about in the book. So, in today's labour environment, it is not uncommon for employers to effectively claim ownership of more than a worker's physical outputs. The amorphous nature of immaterial labour, which has come to become a dominant form of work, at least conceptually, in the global north. And this is the work that involves knowledge, creativity, affect, and interpersonal dynamics, means it's difficult to isolate the value-creating activity to the actual formal working hours. Especially in the, it kind of bleeds into the kind of value creating activity bleeds into times that is not work, that is not formally part of paid employment typically. So especially in the elite creative occupations in digital labour, but also in many entrepreneurial settings, which happen across all kinds of forms of platform work. What a worker does that adds value is difficult to contain to officially designated times. So creative, innovative, work-related ideas can occur at any time of the day when you're on the couch, doom scrolling Twitter for COVID statistics, for instance. And while the passion that drives entrepreneurialism is very much about passion, it can be a deeply held affect that permeates a person's sense of self. And all of this is what adds value and creates value in society. So this is the context where all of the self is drawn into value-creating activity, is the context for material labour and is the context of the social factory, which I won't bore you with the discussion about that. But this immaterial labour also manifests in the accounting fictions of human capital or intellectual capital, in which a company's share price is informed by the knowledge, creativity and vigour, the life energies of the workers who are employed at this firm. So the concept of human capital, as it's deployed in economics, is used to attempt to quantify the subjectivities involved in work and add that to the share price of a company. But human capital is also something workers are encouraged to build. The original idea of human capital referred to the aptitude, skills and knowledge that could be acquired through education and training, and the idea was primarily used as a measure on the return on investment in education, the impact on future income that came from schooling and skills development. But the concept has since been extended to include a range of other subjective aspects, such as innate dispositions, physical or psychological characteristics, inherited traits, and the impact of any life events on those kind of skills and capacities. So it's a holistic calculation of the working subject's value. As Michel Fer puts it today, my human capital is me. And workers today are encouraged constantly to develop their human capital, to develop their capacities. So seeing yourself as human capital encourages various forms of self-appreciation or self-valorization, ways of investing in yourself, investing in your value in the marketplace. And we can see this in the work influencers do to make themselves visible to algorithms, for instance, or to attract good ratings, or in the hope labor that is kind of dominant across a lot of the world today in the kind of dominant mode of neoliberal workers' subjectivity. And all of this is an effect of financialized capitalism, in which prosperity is wagered on the continuously rated value, that's how Michel Fer puts it, the continuously rated value of a person's assets, rather than on maximizing income or direct profitability of ventures. What is their future? It's about speculation on their future income streams. So you invest in the now for the future benefit. And these assets that get speculated on include workers' subjectivities. They get speculated on by workers themselves. So the important component here is a shift from seeing the self as a commodity to be sold in the form of labour power to the self being conceived as an asset which could be leveraged in the marketplace to gain investments by creditors. And those creditors could be an employer, or they could be a venture capitalist willing to invest in you. It could be an advertising for a brand, an advertiser for a brand partnership, for instance. So framed in this way, the skills development, affect regulation, self-branding, networking, and self-styling to corporate fit that all digital laborers do are about investing in assets with a view to expanding their value within the contemporary marketplace. So in the framework of human capital, workers are, as Michelle Fair points out, viewed as active producers, as entrepreneurs of themselves, and more precisely as investors in themselves, as human capital that wishes to appreciate and to value itself and thus allocate its skills accordingly. So being an investor in yourself, rather than a commodified seller of your labor, constitutes a much more gentle and dynamic role than selling yourself as a reified object that can be passed from your control into the control of the employer, which is what's suggested by the commodification framework. So I want to suggest that the language of commodification is not really appropriate for understanding the exchanges we see in digital labour, and certainly not what we see with Bella Thorne and in the work of other influencers. The commodity is associated with heavy industry, about production of tangible goods for consumption by others. The asset, however, is immaterial, light, mobile, often non-rivalrous, but also by virtue of its imaginary and plastic character, tied to the actions, desires, and potentials of its assessors. And those assessors of the value of this capital include the digital labourer themselves, include the worker themselves. They are not precluded from the valorization process. They remain embedded in it. So unlike a commodity, the asset is alive and remains, at least in some part, manipulable by, and therefore in limited control of, the worker themselves. So the asset of human capital remains rooted in the subjectivity and the subject of the worker, and for whom this is the subjectivity in which they are invested and is meaningful to them and remains meaningful to them, regardless of its value out there in the world. And all of this leaves room for the inalienable in digital labour social factory, which is something I've been arguing for a long time. So when viewed through the lens of assetization, I don't think it's the case that everything in contemporary capitalism, including the human subject, is irretrievably commodified. Even while articulating commodity logics, assetized humans are not turned inexorably into products. Now, there are costs for this incorporation into economic logics, and assetization rather than commodification is certainly not available as an option to all people in the same way. The agency this extends may also not be that associated with the free labourer or the unalienated worker, or even the class collective. And it may be lamented as such, and possibly should be lamented as such. But nevertheless, it remains a form of inalienable agency. Understanding that the incorporation of subjectivity into capitalism is as assetization rather than commodification allows a room for unalienated life to manifest, even within digital labour's social factory. So the framework of assetization means we can reassess Bella Thorne's use of OnlyFans and arguably many kinds of self-exploitation in digital labour. She was not reifying herself as an object to be consumed and discarded by fans. And not only because she did not actually supply the nude images she was promising people, which is one of the many controversies of this. So rather than sell herself, she in fact leveraged her assets, her normatively attractive body, her sexuality, her mastery of social media and sexual visual codes, her pre-existing fan base, her understanding of her own brand. And she did all of that in order to generate a sizable revenue. But all of that does not, and certainly her sexuality was performed in this context with a view to potential investors' desires and demands. And those investors are her followers, are her fans, but are also potential directors. She was trying to change her brand image from a Disney star into something a bit more edgy and hoping to recruit some directors on the way. But all of that does not make it any less her sexuality, intricately tied to her sense of self, her ambitions, her affective intensities, her desires. The living, adapting, growing asset, something she's invested in and continues to invest in, rather than a fixed and reified object on a shelf that is to be sold. So while it may remain unfortunate that the subjective agency is shaped by heteropatriarchal capitalism and so succeeds primarily in replicating that logic, it is nevertheless a meaningful, rich, inalienable agency that belongs to Bella Thorne. Bella Thorne is an asset, not a commodity. And I think we can say the same thing about many other digital labours and digital labourers. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to having the conversation with you about this.
Okay, thank you so much, Kylie. I'm going to go straight ahead and play Antonia's video for you guys now.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about an art and research project, or an art-based research project, your pick, that I did for exploring a sex webcam platform. After that, I will put it in conversation with a broader discussion of new forms of online intimacy. So I'm going to do one thing and a half. So first, a bit of context. I was doing research on the American sex webcam platform Jarrett, where thousands of people broadcast sexual performances in a one-to-many broadcasting model, and some of them will receive money in exchange. Indeed, in this self-defined free platform, there are not regular payments but voluntary donations, and it's the performer's job to encourage them. The platform, however, will keep half of the money. What I understood during this research was that the coming platform was ruled by a domestic episteme. Drawing Alice Bainbaum's idea of the slave episteme, the domestic episteme is a thought system with concrete consequences. This domestic model allowed the existence of an unwaged labor market where reproductive labor, including care and sex, are expected. There, work is never mentioned, and sex work is both at the core and at the limit. This free status not only helps the platform to elude legal issues, but sustains the amateur and domestic fiction that the platform thrives on, where money and intimacy are perceived as hostile worlds, following Viviana Selicer, and where people seem to perform out of pleasure, not necessity or coercion. Marxist feminists have shown reproductive labor as structural to capitalism. The SexCam platform not only agrees, it is its business area. But while deeply embedded system of oppression seemed to be the platform business model, this was not the only thing happening there. People were also making connection, developing conversation, having sex or sharing recipes with strangers, getting aroused or bored together. I realized that while the platform was indeed about the work of sex, or the working of sex, it was also about the sex of work, where things were alive and in constant flux. I want to investigate the platform critically, but without forgetting that it was alive, without putting a pin on it first. But I didn't have a vocabulary for addressing this. So here is where the art project appears. For handling the complexity that I want to address, I decide to reduce the problem in literal terms. I set up an interpretation of the shadow bedroom as both my stage and research device. As in a misunderstanding, the platform room became a miniaturized one. The performer was someone who performs. I developed a series of performative interventions on the platform, broadcasting from this dollhouse, acknowledging my presence and mixing maintenance actions with playful erotic ones. While the dollhouse became my expanded interface and stage, the act of playing was probably the most important tool for discovery. So, although there was humor in my approach, there was no mockery. Even if my earnings did not depend on my success on the platform, I had to develop a schedule and a show, lure an audience, and try to retain it. I had to work there and be open to unexpected encounters and accidents, such as when nobody showed up. Also, in passing from being part of the audience to being a performer, even a silly one, I realized how quickly I could lose my rights toward the platform. While this method gave me important insight into the SexCam platform, I'm not claiming having other experience than mine. I have not. However, the dollhouse allowed me to combine theory with a concrete and personal account, and go back and forth between them. In a sort of small feminist methodology, the dollhouse allowed me to situate my position regarding the research. Moreover, and in a kind of queer method, it allowed me to embrace the awkwardness and instability of those positions, being both an insider and an outsider, privileged and precarious. So the use of the dollhouse as a research device and the interaction with the audience gave me a better insight into this domestic model. Not only about the infrastructural aspect of the relationship there, but also the relational aspect of their infrastructure. So what I want to do today is to put this model in conversation with a newer version of this on-demand intimacy. So bear with me. Chatbot can be considered as a part of a larger ecology of services that allow the provision of different versions of intimate and erotic content. As we all know probably too well at this point, the pandemic context made online intimacy an even higher asset, both as an occupation and a need. So emerging digital industries that offer on-demand intimacy are clear evidence of this phenomenon and offer important insight into new forms of labor, social relations, access, and discrimination. I'm calling them on-demand intimacy as a way to encompass the wide range of services involved, including yet exceeding sexual and erotic ones. These digital industries do not exist in isolation, but can be put in relation to a variety of digital platforms and services with different characteristics, cultures, and uses that people use to maximize exposure and earnings. We could call them satellite industries, but what is the central activity varies greatly. So people articulate these services in different ways. Some of them are more explicit than others, some monetize and some not. I'm interested today in the conjecture of two factors, platforms and direct monetization. So I want to put in conversation the sex cam platform that I was mentioning before, Chatbot, with the now famous subscription-based one, OnlyFans. These two platforms, as we will see, do not only incarnate different models, but different stages in the monetization of the social. The link between them is not arbitrary. They do not only share the type of services, audience, and performers, but the previous businesses of both OnlyFans CEO and principal shareholder were webcamming platforms. So there's reminiscences that are being carried here. So this is why the identification of the residual and recursive component they carry helps in the understanding of how discourses on intimacy, work, and access render as infrastructure. Reversely, the question could be what infrastructure played at intimate levels discloses about these discourses. So let's talk about intimacy. So if intimacy can be understood as privileged access, this access renders differently in each platform. On Chatbot, this domestic model translates privileged access as unrestricted entry to a presumed personal space, where attention and sexual content are expected and payment optional. On OnlyFans, on the other hand, privileged access requires a prior subscription and gives permission to enjoy exclusive content. While both platforms claim this privileged access as more authentic, the question is more authentic to what? While the sex cam platform draws on the tension between the amateur and the professional and the associated pleasure of each one, in the subscription platform, authenticity is related to a more craft persona. So can we call this a post-authenticity? Well, we can discuss about it. The personas of this model differ as well, from the amateur to the entrepreneur. But despite the difference between these two platforms, they're often codependent and entangled. One of the reasons for this relates to popularity. In fact, while it is possible to gain popularity on the sex cam platform that could bring followers to social media, The subscription one is explicitly designed to monetize a previously achieved popularity. In fact, OnlyFans' unofficial motto is "Make your influence pay," presenting also as a way to regain some of the value generated for big platforms and giving influencers an important advantage. So I want to close now with two concerns about the high value of popularity and influence in this new context. One is what could be called a recursive popularity, where the conditions that made that popularity possible in the first place get perpetuated, including biases and privilege. The work of Angela Johnson Camming, for example, showed the links between race and ranking on sex webcams. Through recursive popularity, these biases could be carried on and perpetuated on other platforms. The other is about digital gentrification, understanding it as a wide range of discriminatory practices that seize spaces gained with other people's work or cultural value. And as Jessa Lingle says, where all timers become the other. The current landscape of online platforms that benefit a limited number of actors with great reach is a constant challenge for individuals but present an attractive opportunity for players with larger resources and less restricted movement. While sex and erotic workers are always at risk of being deplatformized, influencers can freely benefit from the erotic reputation of a platform such as OnlyFans. So this is what I have for today, and I'm looking forward to continue this conversation.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So yeah, we're just perfectly on time. We're at 7:30 right now, so that gives us quite a lot of time actually to have a chat, which is good because I have so many questions for both of you. We're also going to take questions from the live audience. But yeah, I think there's really like interesting kind of crossovers between your work. I guess I have, yeah, I've a million questions, but I wanted to kick off maybe by I guess asking you both about this sort of idea of this sort of hidden reproductive or care work. So both of your work in various different ways engages with this idea of what's sometimes called reproductive work, like domestic work, care work. Like Kylie, you're drawing comparisons between this kind of work and data producing work online. And then Antonia, a lot of your practice is actually about care, you know, the introduction, I suppose, of care work, maintenance work, or sex work into these sorts of online spaces. And there's really like fascinating crossovers there. Well, I guess I was thinking of something like J.K. Gibson Graham's icebergs. You know, they've got this iceberg where the bit that you can see above the water is the market economy. It's all the waged economy. It's the stuff that's kind of paid for. And then everything else that's underneath the surface of the water, like unwaged work, like reproductive work, like commoning, like breastfeeding, all of these sorts of acts of care or maintenance or reproduction, that's the stuff that's like driving the market economy. But we sort of pretend that that's outside of the market. What I find really interesting maybe about what's going on with platforms like OnlyFans or Chatterbait is that, you know, it's creating a sort of a market for some of these works in ways that are obviously, you know, interesting and problematic. But I guess my first question was, do you feel like maybe the platform has sort of found a way of extracting a wage for housework or a wage for domestic work, you know, through tokens, for example, through these donations, through patronage?
You're asking.
Oh, okay. For both of you. Yeah,
okay.
It's for both of you because I think you're both sort of dealing with this sort of question in your work.
Once I present part of the artwork for an audience, there was to a student audience, there was someone that said like, the place of the housewife is in the webcam, which I found like super good summary of like what these webcams are, and especially at the beginning of like the beginning of this webcamming where this amateur thing was like way more present, so people were trying to kind of like generate some earnings while doing domestic chores. But it was fun, like very interesting right now is like what happened with this kind of like professionalization, where like you don't see that kind of like domestic things as much, but like a kind of like a common a set of skill that like highly professional, but at the same time very homogeneous. So I think we are like not not saying I'm shifting from the idea of the care, but I'm thinking about the what reproductive labor is right now, and it's something that is we can see also like I don't know with like influencer, for example, or these kind of like professional mommies or all that kind of and people were like manage a level of information that was impossible to think years ago, but like maybe we're not shifting, but there's like a different layers of what reproductive labor is and what can be monetized or can become an asset, as Kylie was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we have been monetizing and extracting value from the whole sphere of social reproduction for a long time, and not just in kind of arena of sex work, which is clearly an obvious space of monetization of kind of social reproduction. I just think we're starting to make it more obvious and overt, you know. Partly it's because, as I said, the throwaway line in the digital housewife where I say, we only started recognizing immaterial labor when it moved out of the kitchen and men started doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
all of a sudden this is a thing that, oh my God,
Yeah.
capitalism's exploiting us for the first time. And I'm like, is it now? Really? Because this whole history that says that's not the case. I think it's, I think there is this instrumentalization of it, I guess, a kind of unashamed, overt kind of exploitation of it, kind of embedding of it at the core of the economy quite openly. But we're still struggling with it, I think. And I think the tension around Bella Thorne, for instance, is we're still struggling to accept that that's okay. Like we're still not comfortable with someone going onto Chatbait and getting tokens as a kind of pro-am scenario. We're not happy with that because it's just not, it doesn't sit easy socially and culturally yet, because we still think that social reproduction is this pure natural space. Because if it's also, if it's not a pure natural space, then we can't organically align it with certain bodies as kind of inherent to them. So there's all kinds of reasons why it's causing tension at the minute.
And I think both of you in your talks actually made reference to Viviana Zelitzer, this amazing, anthropologist of kind of who looks, I suppose, really kind of breaks down those distinctions, between what we think of as being like a monetized sex work, for example, and the kinds of extra monetary, fuzzy sorts of gift kinds of relationships that take place in everyday romantic relationships or in marriages. If you want to talk about money and intimacy, you can ask a married couple, how do you manage your money, and those sorts of transactions become visible in different ways. And so I think that's partly what I find really fascinating, I guess, about some of this work, and particularly the way I suppose that the token functions in these different spaces. That I know, Antonia in particular, you're looking at kind of the distinctions between like the token as sort of a donation, I guess, in this kind of Chatterbait space where it's not a payment, and it's kind of being colored or framed in a very particular way to sort of allow for these sorts of extra legal, extra regulatory kind of activities to go through, versus they may be the more kind of patronage or subscription kind of model that you get with something like OnlyFans. I don't know, I guess I'm really, really interested because you've kind of made that distinction there, between like Chatterbait and OnlyFans as being kind of two sort of different kinds of ways of being paid. But I'm really interested, I guess, in both of you seem to point to this idea that in this sort of commodified space that there is also some sort of, there's kind of some kind of lively form of agency. I'm not answering this question very well, but for me, I think there's something in that space around this kind of idea of the token. So the token, it's not quite money. It's something, it's a kind of a special money, as Zalitzer would say. On the one hand, the platform's kind of using that as a way of sort of distinguishing what's happening from payment, and there's a lot of like exploitation or social stratification going on there, but at the same time there's maybe some sort of agency as well on the part of the user to pay and get paid, and to sort of exploit that sort of token or that monetary system to their own ends. And I just wondered what both of you sort of thought of that idea, or if you wanted to expand maybe a little bit, Antonia as well, maybe on some of the ideas that you've put forward about different kinds of payments.
Well, yes. Well, tokens are first is tokens. These particular tokens are not the like blockchain tokens or cryptocurrency tokens, but it's kind of like a misleading or not very creative name for like chatbot tokens are things that you can buy and then pay, but they're very fascinating for me because they encapsulate like so many things there, and they're like it's a fascinating exploration of money in a very particular case. And one of the fascinating thing is that chatbot tokens are the money for paying a work that is explicitly labeled as non-work. So like it carries all that kind of tension, and that these tensions are very in tune with this domestic episteme, where like people are not really working, and all that baggage is carried in this money. But also have like and that's a very important thing. And another is that the audience can communicate with the performers, and it's a they can like send messages, but probably they're going to be ignored if those messages are not accompanied by a donation. So the token become a really like a social mean or social medium, and well, that relate a lot with Lana Swartz's work, but this is a very specific and is I mean, there's a lot of connection to make there, but it's interesting because it's very specific. And also, the other thing that is interesting is that these tokens, the audience can buy with like, for example, MasterCard, PayPal, etc. But the performer can only cash with other services. So not only it's not only like a medium of transaction, but something that articulate or disclose two different ecologies for two different audiences, and not only the discrimination that this like a domestic episteme like carries, but also like financial discrimination towards sex workers. So it's really astonishing the amount of layers that this kind of fictional currency can have. Yeah.
I just talking about tokens and that kind of exchange. I've just recently read David Craig and others book on Ranghong, if I'm pronouncing that badly, Chinese influencers. And it's interesting how the token, the gifting, the social tipping, however they describe it, is across multiple platforms in Chinese social media in ways it hasn't in kind of, for lack of a better word, Western social media, on the social media entertainment enterprises here. And I think there is some kind of, perhaps there's some cultural difference here, that perhaps that maybe that disquiet about this mode of engagement is perhaps slightly different. And I don't know, again, I'm just reading into this, it just came to me. But I like what you said there, Antonia, about the multiple meanings of the token. You know, it's not just money, it's not just it's a whole social layers built up into what that is. And I think that's really important to understand. I think that that's also true in terms of money, when we think about what money means in it, like a remittance back home to someone who's from a migrant worker, that it's all bound up with layers of meaning, and it means something other than just the finance. And I mean, yeah, money is an abstraction, but it's also embedded. And I think these tokens just show that really well.
I remember seeing one I was in Money 2020 a couple of years ago. It's like a, trade show in Las Vegas. And there was an Irish company, and of course they were Irish and I was Irish. So we were talking and they had a stand, and they had a company where they were selling phone credit. And so their model was, you can buy phone credit and you can send it anywhere in the world. And what fascinated me, and I couldn't get him to say, yeah, this is money, but obviously it was the whole business model was based around what you just spoke about, Kylie, which is this like international remittances. So you're not buying phone credit, actually you're sending money, but the way then that it's tokenized in like a particular kind of special money allows you to avoid all the regulation around sending money home. But I think what Antonia is pointing to as well, which is so interesting, is this like, and as she's mentioned Lana's book, which I also have here. So Lana's book, which looks kind of quite closely at this idea of this social stratification emerging around these kinds of new forms of money, is that, the way in which like people who are actually performing on the platforms maybe have difficulty getting paid versus, people who are paying. And I wanted to ask you guys, I guess, about the platform, because my understanding is, I think, both platforms take a cut. So I think Chatterbait takes 50%, OnlyFans 20%, but with OnlyFans you kind of have to bring your audience with you. Do you know what I mean? So you're, as Kylie says, you're leveraging something. So where does the platform, I suppose, fit in with, maybe particularly Kylie, with your idea of the assetization,
Yeah, the platform is, I think the economics are complex, and I think I'm still thinking through all of that. I was focused very specifically on the labor and the laborers rather than the platforms, and their role. But the platforms are effectively a platform or a mechanism or a market, I guess, for you to I guess distribute. What do you do with assets? or to test or value your assets, right? They become a useful tool. And it's interesting that when you look at, when we think about some of the most exploited workers in the digital economy, we're talking about like delivery riders and people in the gig economy and the platform gig economy, that for many of those workers, and all the studies are showing, they see it as a positive thing, that it is actually a better income source, and it is an opportunity to be entrepreneurialism, to be your own boss. So platforms do some really interesting work about in disappearing themselves, but providing a valuable platform, like a better word, for launching and valuing your asset, or putting your asset in front of other people who can then value it for you.
Mm-hmm. It's a really bad pun, but I was thinking about I think is it George Kafenzi's calls, and this is going to sound like a bad innuendo because it's actually called the putting out system. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Which, so I don't know, it kind of reminded me of that idea, this sort of pre-capitalist market where you provide particular kinds of tools or materials for somebody to sort of, but then you're extracting kind of rent or value back. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the platform or the role of the platform, Antonia.
I think between these two type of platform, there's a lot of differences, because, for example, in the case of Chatterbait, the Chatterbait create its own need, in the sense that is not only like providing like streams and things like that, but especially because of this money. And the only way to be paid is through this money. And even if they say like, oh, this is a free platform, that is the main revenue, because like they cut like this 50%, which is a totally blatant. And but in the case of OnlyFans, I think they are kind of like I think, sorry if I'm thinking it's this image, but the image that I have is the uroboros, kind of like the snake that eats its own tail. Because actually you don't need OnlyFans as a platform. You only need a system to be paid, because like OnlyFans doesn't provide doesn't, you cannot become popular on OnlyFans. OnlyFans doesn't do anything for you in those terms. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's go. It's like, I'm an influencer, but let's go to the bank together. It's something like that. So but for example, now that Twitter is creating this like kind of like super followers where you can tip your the person that you are following, so and Venmo and things like that. So I think they're like uh, not they're kind of like paving the route to this kind of interaction, but I think they're going to become obsolete because you don't really need that platform. The other thing that is super interesting is and super relevant is this tension that for in one side you have like, and we're going to have more platforms that allow payment, but on the other hand we have like more sex workers that are being like deplatformized. So and also like this influencer like doing kind of like erotic things, doing things that erotic laborers could do, but those erotic laborers are being deplatformized. So I think we are going to see a lot of that circulation.
And I see
Well,
Elaine
yeah.
Hoey has a question which kind of relates to this. Maybe you've just answered it actually, where she's asking about the relationship between a virtual sex labor market and real world economic precarity. Like, how do these two kind of relate to one another?
They relate in I mean, they don't relate in the sense that it's not just precarious people engaging in online sex work. It's not necessarily that relationship, but there is the relationship in that all digital labor is kind of marked by precarity. It's in a precarious context that it is undercompensated in many ways. There's no job security, there's no labor security, there's no income security if you're at the mercy of algorithms. So there's a whole suite of things that mark precarity that say Guy Standing talks about, and you'll find all of them across platforms, and you'll find them across the virtual sex labor market as well. So no and yes. No and yes, it is connected to real world economic precariousness. It reduces real world economic precariousness as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing is that we tend to think in platform labor as something that is kind of like is like as the precarization of labor, but things like sex work or care work shows like the other way around, like that labor that is already precarious that can be platformized, and there's also like an interesting circulation there, and so many like new uses of platform, new uses of money that come from more precarious settings like sex work, care work, that are being like adopted by this platform. So it's not only in one direction.
Yeah, one of the key things I'm finding in writing this book across various forms of digital labor is the kind of absorption, or the kind of, I don't know, and the words haven't come out yet what it actually is, but the way in which marginalized economic practices are being centered in the economy. So things like entrepreneurialism and hustle, which are now core business practice. And that used to be a kind of non-market economy, people on the fringes, and now it's like that's what you do. What the hell's going on here? What's happening? Yeah, so it's part of that whole dynamic of kind of the margin becoming the core. And then my question is, what happens to the margins? But anyway,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, and I love the Silvio Lorusso's term of he talks about the entre precariat.
mm-hmm.
I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
I see there's a question here, quite an interesting question about your concept of post-authenticity, Antonia. But maybe actually before we get to that, I actually have a question I think that might lead in a little bit here, which is I really wanted to ask you what, and both of you, I guess, what is your take on then virtual streamers? So I'm quite interested in Twitch at the moment and payments and tokens in Twitch and these sort of game, streaming platforms. So I don't know, how the hell do we position like these sorts of virtual influencers within this kind of economic model? Any thoughts?
I have done, and I'm doing research on Project Melody, which is which is a virtual character. Is so interesting. This is a virtual character playing along, performing along a woman in the woman section of Charlotte,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so interesting because this character, which is like managed by a team and needs a lot of like is very resource involved, it brought along a gamer audience, and so like very quickly it became super popular. And but there's a lot of questions. Well, this character, for example, can can receive money in Patreon because it's not a person doing sexual things, but a character. So the level of like, not dominance, but the lack of restrictions, like this character doesn't have the restriction that sex workers, for example, have. So that can, and also, for example, like people have to like, let's say, like prepare things for Twitch, prepare things for YouTube, and but if you're a virtual character with a team behind, it's very easy to prepare like for this multi-format. So it's a super interesting question about like who's able to profit from this current ecology, with like people had to like do things here and there, and all these other restrictions. What so that's what I would love to think together, this idea of post authenticity, because I think there's something there that I can't grasp right now, but I would love to.
Do you want to try and unpack this a little? So this idea of post-authenticity, I think it's so interesting.
Well, I was thinking that in term of this virtual character, and then I came along with this the beautiful fighting girl idea. Uh, so like so then I got lost because it's a whole world in itself, which is like the and is and relate to otaku culture, which this thing about this kind of like fictional character is real in kind of like Lacanian terms, and you can and you can like have all this real attachment to this character, and etc etc. So I think there's something there, but I was trying to think of, for example, and related to Kylie's work on OnlyFans, like because of, for example, in Charlotte and OnlyFans, they both claim to be authentic, but and the idea is kind of like authentic in relation to what, and this thing is changing. So that's what I was thinking in introducing the idea of the like post authenticity as something that like work after like some kind of like authentic ground that is also shifting.
Yeah.
Is it authenticity without a referent? So it's like a free floating authenticity that doesn't have a reference below it. It's a non-warranted authenticity. So it doesn't, an authenticity that doesn't track back to the warranted body. It's just free floating there in the universe as an asset, right?
Oh yeah.
Floating authenticity becomes your asset, because the bit I don't really talk about and don't really explore that much is that very strategic performance of self. But this is not, Bella Thorne it is her subjectivity. She owns that bit of it, and it is still meaningfully her, but she's also very carefully crafted.
Yes.
Going back to Terry Sank's work on cam girls back in the day, which goes, they're in control of the on-off switch, right?
Yes.
There's an on-off switch, kind of authentic, and then all the influence literature around that, calibrated authenticity that I think Crystal Aberton talks.
Yes.
That phrase.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking of her work, but I wanted to ask you about this in relation to, which is maybe we don't see it on OnlyFans that I know of, or Chatterbait, but like something like I was thinking about while watching your video, Kylie, I was thinking about like the apology or the anxiety video. So this trope that you get in influencers where they put on a grey hoodie and cry and say, I'm very anxious. And, on the one hand, as you say, that's this sort of very crafted kind of, expression of, it's a kind of affective labor where you're sort of performing something, but also maybe there's very possibly a manifestation at the same time of the anxiety or the alienation that monetizing every aspect of yourself might require.
It is real. I mean, that's real affect. It's real.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because again, we're looking at identities that part of what, so when I talk about this stuff to influencer researchers, and they're like, well, that's just stupid. Of course it's not commodified, and of course it's agency. But when I talk to this in terms of Marxists, it was like, it's a complete inverse. It can't be real, it can't be authentic.
It's modified. It's in this weird in between, kind of between those. Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle, there's this position where it is real and it's meaningful, yet it is crafted with a view to the investors. It's crafted with a view, but it's still yours, it's still me. And I think, and when in the book I talk about, because I'm talking about a range of digital laborers, and I'm talking about people who work for Google and Facebook and coders and what have you, and programmers, and the performance of masculinity. And I think about the degendering of female programmers when they go into those grow environments. And that itself is this performance. It's a similar kind of dynamic, this way of constructing yourself, presenting yourself with a view to investors. And I put lipstick on for this because I'm put my investors of my academic status, my kind of my fans out there. I'm investing in this because I'm looking to get some valorization from you in some way. So it's there across a lot of stuff, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of, did you guys read Emily Witt's Future Sex? So that's actually what got me interested in Chatterbait and money. First of all, she talks about tokens, but there's a bit in that where she's interviewing a porn actress from kink.com, and they're like, she's sort of asking her about her experience of this BDSM scene that's just been recorded. And she says to the actress afterwards, did you enjoy, like, was there any part of that you enjoyed? And she looked at her blankly and says, the whole thing. But it's a really kind of confusing one when you're reading it, because it's like you can't really unpack the truth claim there, because yes and maybe no, and is this still part of that sort of performance of authenticity or not? Yeah, sorry, I think you wanted to say something, Antonia, and I was
but it was about like anxiety, and that I attend a talk by Max Haven and another person, and they were presenting a work on like about students thinking about anxiety and the financialization of university, like linking these two things together and thinking about like that anxiety. And I think that could be interesting for you, Rachel, as a form of refusal. So I think there's and as Kylie was saying, there's like real affect there, but it's also like real in those terms, also like probably real potential of something. And it's interesting that it's like, well, younger people like engaging mostly in that kind of thing. So there is something interesting to talk about. And
I see there's a question here in the chat. We've quite a lot of comments actually, but this came in a little while ago. But it's from Colin Keaty Tobble. So I know at some point, you had this very interesting idea Antonia, of money as being an expressive medium, like the way in which the token expresses something. I think this is sort of a question I was wondering about as well. Like, is there something different about this kind of expression through the token online from, is it, Colin's asking, is that kind of expression particular or amplified on these platforms? Or is it like the expectation to smile when serving tables? Is it like when somebody, you know, like that trope in films where somebody gives like a stripper like dollar bills or something to make them dance? Is there something different going on, like in the way money is expressing maybe on those platforms?
Well, yes, in this, there's two things. The one is kind of like the reduction of dimensions that we have in the like online, like that we have online, like right now, for example. Even like if it's very engaging, we can, I don't know, we don't know like if you're using cologne or like the movement in space or the temperature or all that kind of things that get reduced. So I think there's something related to uh, the the ways that you can communicate get reduced as well. So you have money becomes super important because it's one of the crucial ways to communicate with another person. And the other thing that is interesting is for me to think money as media, not only in the sense of a channel, like a medium of exchange, but in the biological sense of medium, as something that creates an environment. So that's why I think the analysis of like these super particular currencies are important, because they can illustrate both ways. uh, One is like, yeah, money used as a way to communicate with another person, but also as a way to create an environment. So that kind of like particularities, I think they're worthy too. Yeah.
I'm just picking up on the connection to, sorry, my microphone's terrible. Picking up on the connection to, of course, Hochschild's uh, emotional labor when it comes to the expectation to smile while serving on tables. And I think, again, this goes back to, we're in an immaterial labor environment, we're in an affective labor environment. And yeah, I think that's, and back to that first question about the kind of exploitation of social reproduction, right? Exploitation of self, and being drawn in to the social factory. Yeah, this is a slightly different answer to the question, but I'm looking at how it's written in the chat there, and I'm like, I can't help but go to you know, the air stewards in Hochschild's study, smiling politely. Yeah.
But did I understand it when you were speaking about this idea of assetization? It seemed though like you understood that there was maybe more sort of agency within that than in sort of most kinds of affective labor, or that there was some kind of something.
I think I see agency in affective labor as well. I think, you know, I mean, labor has agency. It always has. I mean, that's how, you know, that's, you know, the dialectic, right? It's all about work as agency. And I think there's still something I'm working through around what it means for to move from being, this is getting very abstract Marxist stuff, but to move from being a kind of labor power commodity to being an asset, to selling yourself as an asset, to leveraging your asset, not selling yourself, leveraging an asset, and I actually do think there's a potential for different kinds of disruptions, different kinds of engagements. If we think about the kind of collective work and the kind of union struggle, which we'd all kind of, you know, advocate for, etc., that tends to be about reproducing the free laborer, right? The free laborer of Marx is inherent to the union movement, because what you're actually doing is sustaining and protecting that figure. For an assetized worker, then that union movement doesn't necessarily work in the same way, right? There's more individualized forms of resistance that would be as useful than the collective. And of course, the problem with the unionized version of supporting the free labor is it actually keeps capitalism intact, because it is about better conditions for that free laborer. Doesn't actually overturn the actual exploitation dynamic, right? That's one of Michelle Fair's arguments.
Yeah.
So it reproduces the system in some ways. So when you've got assetized workers, there's some other forms of agency, there's some other forms of potentially disruptive struggle that we can look for. And one of the ones I refer to is gossip. Sophie Bishop's work on gossip and influences as a particular form of resistance. It's more individualized, and it's not, it's a class struggle, and it's not unionization, but it's a form of agency and resistance there. Probably bring a question going on.
No, probably way off. Maybe I'm going way off topic now, but you're reminding me. I read a book recently by a young guy, Cant is his name, called Writing for Deliveroo, and it's about the ways in which I suppose algorithms on the platform have made it very, very difficult to kind of resist, I guess, work in the normal ways. But weirdly, what he actually points to kind of in the end is the sort of power of collective forms of action in those situations. But I guess those workers aren't, they're not leveraging maybe assets in the ways of the kind of OnlyFans worker,
Yeah, they're maybe slightly different, but also one of the problems I have with all the stuff around worker struggle and digital labor is all focused on Deliveroo and Uber, and it's focused on that type of worker. And these feminized platform workers are just kind of left out, and the different forms of struggle that happen over there are just kind of not in the literature. It kind of one of those things that pisses me off in my work.
Yeah.
Is that gender divide between what's important, and it's like apparently it's just delivery riders who happen to be men.
Sorry, I have a question for Kylie. It's about like this tension between the asset and the commodity, and you were saying that the asset is more related to speculation, and the commodities can decay, right? Like so you have like this kind of like less. I don't know if material is the word, but there's a tension there. So I'm thinking, or I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think this asset or assetization has like more kind of like emergent potential, or like affect potential, or something that could be transformed into collective action?
I think it can, because it's always embedded in the subject in ways. I think that's how I'm magicking up this idea of the asset, because it is about because it's not fungible. It's not something that moves from you. It's something that is always plastic, and it's always it's always emergent. Like it's always potentially something else. So I think it may change the terrain. Michelle Fair talks about shareholder resistances. So and I was thinking about the was Deliveroo, wasn't it, who workers recently who brought down the share price when they're doing the IPO, right? They challenged the share price, and you hit them in the financial markets, right, rather than doing the kind of labor strike. But I think there's also other grounds that I can't quite articulate yet, right? And I think, yeah, and I think it's always about that excess. It's always about creating. That's what social reproduction is. It's always in excess. It's always something that can't be captured. Always, there's always bleeding out, and no matter what capital does, it can't capture all of itself, right? It can't capture it all, and so it's always there with the potential, and always the potential to build alliances. And I think I think I was recently reading Gaji Bhattacharya's Rethinking Racial Capitalism. And I think that there's the quote I had in my slides, which is from Adkins about, there are some people who are still commodified. But I think it's a kind of necropolitics of exclusion, that there will be collective action born out of that shared experience of precarity that might bring back collective action in different ways, but I think the terrain might be different. I'm not sure that necessarily comes directly out of being assetized. And in some ways, being assetized ameliorates, at least conceptually ameliorates some of the negative aspects of work, of labor, of exploitation, because it's associated with disalienation and being your own boss, etc. So it's in some ways it's a band-aid, but I think, yeah, that's a bit of a ramble. I think there's a lot of stuff going on under the surface of work right now in struggle that's slightly more than the union getting a bunch of workers together to go on strike and getting conditions.
I was on a panel with Gargi actually a couple of weeks ago. It was on refusal in labour, and she's just amazing. So yeah, I think everyone needs to like read her and listen to her on resistance and refusal. I'm conscious of the time because actually, we kind of have it as 7 to 8. So we might kind of start wrapping things up, I think.
There was one question about artwork.
Yeah, I was actually looking for that because I thought there was one somewhere as well, but I couldn't find it. It's something about galleries. Was it connecting artwork?
Taking 50% revenue reminds me of galleries taking 50% from the artwork sold. Maybe this has something to do with creative non-work tending to be considered less worthy or less worthy of rewards or regards. Yes. Yes.
Well, like Antonia's work, there's such interesting, I think, like crossovers for me in your work between this idea of like the artist, I guess, as an entrepreneur as well, of the self, and they kind of that sort of artistic work, and then also domestic work, reproductive work, and then online sex work, and the kind of conflation of all of those.
Yeah, I try to for me was important. For me, the work in the dollhouse was important. Was really work and I really had to kind of like develop something that was like that could be read in a variety of contexts, and so and also I have to show it up and be responsible for an audience. So for me, it was important to, even if I was not doing erotic labor or sex work there, was important to put like all kind of work under a similar framework, and that's why the for example the reproductive labor there, and like at the beginning I thought that I was going to just like do maintenance action and I was going to clean the place, and then I realized that if I really have to be like true to the platform, I had to do other things, and if I really want to do this for my research, I have to do more things. So it was really like an investment in those terms, and yeah, it was important for me to think about work in that way. Yeah.
Well, I think we might leave it there. I'm just seeing it's 1:15, so we've kind of gone over by about 15 minutes. Unless you guys do you have any kind of final sort of comments or anything you wanted to clarify? Or hi, Kylie's cat. What's his name again?
Herbie.
Herbie. Hi, Herbie.
This will be Herbie's bottom coming up.
Okay, well, I just want to say huge thanks to Kylie and Antonia for your amazing talks and all of your insights. This was so interesting. And also big thanks to Anne Kelly in the NCAD gallery, who's been in charge of the streaming and handling all the questions and everything in the background. And also thank you to everyone who's been watching and asking and making loads of comments. So actually, along with the questions, loads of people have just been saying they really enjoyed your talks, and thank you so much. And yeah, so I think we'll leave it there, but thank you so much, guys. Okay.
Thank you so
Bye,
much for
everyone.
the invitation.
Yeah. And our
Yeah.
next, just to say, I guess our next event is going to be May 13th, so 2 weeks time, and that's with Rosa Menkman, artist Rosa Menkman, and theorist Joanna Zelinska. So they're exploring, yeah, kind of the ways in which I suppose algorithms, machine vision, and things are transforming visual culture. So it should be really interesting.